Well, hello everybody. I just wanted to make a short video here. Maybe it can help somebody else out in the future. What we have here is a 2017 Momentum M Class. It's the 350M toy hauler, fifth wheel. Was having some issues with the dump valves from the previous owner when I purchased it, and I tried to do a lot of online research to try to figure out how I might tackle replacing those valves. In the process of doing that, I have a couple ideas of what I think caused it. By not knowing all of the information about what's going on with those valves, potentially every time you're dumping your valves or your waste tanks, you could be causing more issues and stretching out your cables. On this model, the gray tank and black tank are inside of this compartment here. The dump valve handles are anyway. There's an additional gray tank that's in the back for the rear half bath, which you can see right here is the valve for that. Buying this RV from the previous owner, he stated to me that one of the tanks in the front for this dump valve had been leaking. Thinking that the valve hadn't been closed all the way, he went ahead and he bought one of these knife valves aftermarket that just slip on and thread on, as you can see. For me, I like to have things that work, so I decided that I was going to try to tackle fixing this. And the concern that I had was by tearing everything apart, as you can see down here, is the plastic coating with also the space blanket bubble type insulation that's down there. They call this chloroplast, is the black part. You can see the spare tire. I had to remove that. The chief concern that I had is that I would start this project, I would get into a bad spot, and then I'd have a hard time putting it back together. And as it sits like this, obviously it's not towable. I have already replaced the cables, as you can see here, and I'm gonna kind of show where the path might go inside of this compartment. Got the flashlight in here. You can see that they come around a lot of other tubing. It's kind of a rat's nest in there, but there's a little port, a channel that's back in there that goes back towards those HVAC ducts, if you will. So I kind of had to wiggle them to get them in there, and then they would poke out in the bottom, adjust your length, that kind of a thing. Let's talk about what I think caused this problem. My original thought was that these old ones that are down here on the ground, that the inner wire had been corroding against the outer black portion of this cable. It's kind of I'll try to get in here a little bit closer. It's similar to just a brake cable on a bicycle. So I thought maybe this inner wire here was corroding and then making this here grab a hold of that inner wire and making it difficult for that wire to move. But after doing the install and getting the proper parts here, Volterra, the maker of this valve and cable, they say to put this red tab, it's a spacer, put that on there before you set up your valve. You know, you bend your wires, that kind of a thing, so that you can get it to fit properly. So here's my thought. That gap right there, the valve is currently closed. I have a feeling that people look at that and they go, well, my valve's not closed yet. So they add additional pressure on this and they push really hard to get that valve to close. So because of that, I believe the gray tank that he was saying was leaking is due to this. And I think that's because he was pushing so hard on that valve that it stretched this portion out, and now the outer sheathing is stretched out and too long and therefore can no longer close the valve. What I found out too is that, I don't know if this is from the factory or not, but black tape meant the black valve, and then no tape meant the gray valve. So in theory, that's my thought. So going forward, I'm just gonna have to keep in mind that I can't push those things all the way against the bulkhead and expect that wire that's back here to not stretch. So a good solid movement with a solid, press on there, and leaving about that, half-inch gap or so on that valve, I think is gonna be the trick. We'll button everything back up and take it for a test run and then see what we find out. I'm gonna show you the parts that we took off, which there's not very many of those. Those are 3/8 by probably 1 inch self-tapping screws. that screw into the frame. That chloroplast that's hanging down here is simply held up by, I tried to orient them correctly, just 3 that I had to take off of this channeling, and then another one for the front and another one for the other side. So I did have to take an angle iron and cut the 2 side ones because they put it all in one piece, and it was difficult to remove. Some of the challenges that we ran into, I'm going to crawl underneath here and then show you exactly where it's at. If you want to cut your chloroplast and get up inside there without taking all the chloroplast off like I've done, I've seen a lot of people do that. I wanted to expose everything, take a look underneath, and then make sure that, you know, wiring and that kind of stuff wasn't going to be an issue in the future. So here's the dump valve. It kind of angles back, and then it goes right into a channel, which I'm gonna crawl in here and then show you here in a second. So now that we're under the RV here, there are a couple cross braces that go through here, just holding on. This is your black tank. It'll be the driver's side of the RV. It's quite large. And then on the right-hand side is the gray tank. The valves for those, from, you know, the orientation of the dump valve from the outside, it angles in a little bit, and then they're just right there. So that's the black one. And then right there, excuse me, is the gray one. In the process of doing this, what I found was that a couple of these cables that I purchased were too long. So the cause of that was making it so that by the manufacturer, they want 6 inches of this cable to be perfectly straight before it goes into the valve body itself. So with the cable being too long, then this portion of the cable was bent way over here to the rear and making it kind of bind up here, making it difficult to open and close. Using just diagonal cutters after taking, if you can recognize what I'm showing you here, this is the cable. This is the inner cable of that sheathing that grabs a hold of the valve and opens and closes it. So you pull this cable back inside of the outer sheathing far enough that you can just cut the black, and then leave enough of this bare wire exposed once you push the valve handle back in. And then you end up, if I can get a good picture of it here, you end up bending that wire inside of the valve rod, if you will. Let's talk about a couple of challenges that I had. While trying to tackle this thing, the biggest challenge that I had was this wire that's hanging down right here. That wiring goes through the chloroplast and then up to some wiring. I was really unsure of to what this was because it's a new RV to me. But there's a channel right here that goes all the way down the frame rail, and then it dead ends up there just to the right of the landing gear, the front bulkhead of the RV itself. Having it apart, knowing what it is now, that's LED lighting, that's the step light, they call it. That is on both sides of the RV. However, this one I have removed. And the reason is because of road grime and everything else, it was starting to settle and hang off the body. And here is the wiring for the other side. So why is this a problem? Simply because in order to peel the chloroplast, all of this stuff, back far enough, I had to remove and cut that wire so it's no longer attached to its power wire. So I'm gonna have to put those back together when I start to roll the chloroplast back up. Not a big deal, but a challenge nonetheless. The other thing that I've done is looking at some of the wiring, obviously the landing gear, hydraulics and all that stuff here. Decided to try to keep it off of the rail where those self-tapping screws go in, which leaves an exposed screw similar to that one right there, so that your hydraulic lines do not touch that. So a little bit of cleanup, not a whole lot. Probably the dirtiest part of this job was the very beginning, pulling this thing apart. You can see some insulation down there. It's about a 3-inch, I think it's R7, but it's about 3 inches in depth, about 8 feet long and about 16 inches wide. We found probably no less than 7 carcasses in here. So I plan to replace the insulation, go into, you know, a box store today so I can put that back up and then get my chloroplast back up. Apparently, you don't want to use the paper backed insulation because it doesn't allow the underside of the RV to breathe. and therefore you could run into some mold issues. We're gonna do that today. So that's the background of what the project was and is. You can see over here by the trash can, that's the old insulation that we pulled out with all the mouse carcasses. That was probably the dirtiest part of the job, very stinky. The back portion, I decided I'm not gonna tackle this one, just simply because of the way the underside of the RV looks. The white freshwater dump valve that's up there would prevent me from rolling the chloroplast forward in this case. So my fix for that is, if my valves in the front work, then all I'm going to do is just take that valve off of there and move it to the back. We don't plan to use the back toilet and sink much at all, so really shouldn't be a player. I'll get that insulation in there, probably do a quick video just to show how I did that, or the layout configuration of what I did and why, and then I'll start to button her back up. So here's the insulation that I purchased. It's meant for a 2x4 wall. The insulation that came out of the RV originally was a non-backing R7. I went to Home Depot and I bought 2 rolls because I needed 5 8-foot long pieces. So the original R value was 7, and this is about the same thickness, and this is the R13, just the pink standard insulation. So my idea is I'm just using gloves and just peeling that stuff off, but as for a reference, the one here on the left is the side of the insulation that had the backing on it. The one on the right is the clean surface, so the underside of this one would be the side that I pulled the backing off. So I plan to install it the way that it is on the left, and that way when we're looking at it from below and working with the insulation, either duct tape or whatever we're going to hold this thing up with, we're working with the cleaner surface rather than the dirty surface. So here's all the insulation that we think we might need, about $27 or so at Home Depot. So 5 runs of about 8 feet is what I did. This one in the middle here, this guy's about 7 feet, just to use the remnants of what was on one of the rolls. Okay, so now we're underneath the RV down here. Got the insulation up, so there's that spar that's right here underneath the opening of the tank. As you can see, the valve is right there with the wiring. So I elected not to try to tie up these 2 front pieces. I'm just going to use the insulation that comes with it, the space blanket, if you will. So that way, if I do end up having to get back down under here again, the forward portion, which I didn't need to gain access to at all, this insulation should stay up. When I say should, it's duct tape, it's attached to fiberglass, and then down to the rail that's on the forward edge as well. Not a strong attachment, but it serves my purpose for now. And of note, I cleaned off this rail, which is where that forward LED step light is going to sit. I did put the cover back on the other LED strip light. It's just on the other side of the exhaust pipe here, running down the rail. So pull those off, cleaned them, put it back up. And then the things that I have to worry about now is that connection. I need to poke the wire back through. I don't have the intrinsically safe clips that they used out of the factory. So I'm gonna do the electrical connectors on the outside, and then I'm gonna put some goo on there just to keep it from looking ugly. So I'll show you this other side. So there's the wires that are coming through the insulation for that. It did kind of pop out the other side, so I'm gonna have to put it through that hole once I get the plastic up. The last step here is to now reverse roll this insulation and the plastic covering underneath, and then we'll button her back up. One thing that we did use putting up that insulation in the forward section here was about a 4.5 foot piece of wood. That single jack stand, put 3 pieces or 3 strips of that insulation over the top of it, and then push the wood up with that insulation up against these 2 metal bars up here, and then that allowed us to do the taping. Dirty job, wouldn't recommend doing it alone. The wife helped out a lot. So now here's the chloroplast that's held back up in place by all the screws. We did use that jack stand and the wood piece one last time, similar to how we did it for the insulation. However, it was parallel to the road, if you will, if that makes sense. After having these things down for quite a while, a lot of the spots that were on this rail where the bolts went in, I don't know if I can get a video where you can see how wavy it is, but we had to buy some self-tapping screws. They were 3/8 by 1 inch, and then we kind of just added some new self-tappers along the rail. So all in all, I think it went pretty good. Again, 2-day project. I think if I had to do this again in the future, maybe 1 full day, but not fun. So now we're all buttoned up here, so you can see the spare tires back up. All the coating and everything is set back up and looks pretty good. I feel like I needed to explain a little bit more maybe about the rear gray tank, they call it, but it's also a black tank just simply because it's the rear shower and, or I'm sorry, the toilet and sink that go along with it. But really the reason why we decided not to attack this in particular valve going up into there is simply because of the freshwater waste right there. So you can open that up, fresh water will come out of the rear tank. I am not sure that I would be able to get that plastic coating off of there without breaking off that PVC pipe, or not sure if it threads or anything else. But for that reason, we decided not to try to tackle the back. Also because of the axles, and way up there is where the port comes out for that drain valve. So I'm assuming that valve is probably right about there somewhere. So a little bit more than we were willing to tackle at this this particular project. So, but all in all, complete. I hope you find this video useful.